Today we are talking homeschooling and particularly parenting in a pandemic and navigating the homeschool process. I know a lot of people weren't comfortable sending their kids back to school, and so they wanted to pivot to homeschool and had trouble navigating that whole process. So I had a ton of questions and no one to really answer them. So I thought it would be great to invite the one and only Tansey Louis, who is the founder of the Student Shed, which is an e-learning platform. A lot of your kids may have used it during BJCs, BGCSEs, GLAD, for exam preparation. And she's also a homeschooling mom of 4, which is awesome. We've been homeschooling for 12 years now, which is incredible. And so with that, navigating you probably were doing it before a lot of people were doing it. And so you can give insight in terms of how does one get started? What does the process look like for you? How do you get approval from the government? Do you need approval from the government? And so, those different aspects of it where moms were needing information, but they felt that they weren't getting the answers that they needed. So I will just turn it over to you to let us know.
Okay, good. Hello, Sammy and everyone. Thank you for having me this morning. I'm very happy to be here to speak with you about homeschooling because it's actually a passion of mine to just talk with other parents about education and getting involved with their kids' education. I mean, because, well, it's a lot of fun. I just think it's a lot of fun. And so right now, more than ever, a lot of parents are considering homeschooling, and maybe not even by choice, but out of necessity because of what's going on today in the economy. And so as we talk about homeschooling, it's funny because the tips or the ideas and the tips that I would share all depend on your reason for homeschooling, and also it depends on how long you intend to homeschool. So for example, if you're homeschooling, say just for the year until all of this blows over, then the advice would be different versus if you're homeschooling, say for the long run or until the end, because your flexibility, your options changes depending on whether it's temporary or a permanent thing. And so I guess we can start by talking about if you know that you're ready to start homeschooling, but you're stuck, you don't know where to begin. I think a good place to start would be, if you haven't done it already, is to ask yourself why. Why are you homeschooling? Because there's a lot of reasons why people homeschooling, but the important thing is that you know why, because that's going to keep you grounded for the long haul or the short haul, if that is your hope. I think that when you're homeschooling, you want to consider the fact that it gets tough sometimes. And on those days when it gets tough, sometimes parents also get burnt out. You want to know why you're homeschooling, because that's going to keep you grounded. Just like any other thing that you pursue in life, you need to know why you're doing it in order to really accomplish your goal. And so some reasons why parents may homeschool are flexibility, because when you're homeschooling, you really have a lot of flexibility as it relates to when you homeschool, the time you homeschool, where you homeschool. I've heard of parents who car school and boat school as well. And there's even parents that unschool. And there are so many different ways to homeschool. Now, another reason people decide to homeschool is because it creates a quality educational experience for your kid. Now, when your kids are in school, in a traditional school setting, the teacher has to keep the lessons moving on and cannot wait until everybody always gets it for every single topic. But when you're in when you're in homeschool, you don't have to keep going on when your child doesn't get it. You can stay on a topic until he or she gets it. And that creates a high quality of education. Another reason parents decide to homeschool is religious beliefs. So when you homeschool, you can practice your religious beliefs free of prejudices. And you have that flexibility to do that. Also, it's a customized learning option when you homeschool. I met a parent she had a son who was interested in computer training, and the computer training courses were being taught by a computer business. He wasn't a school who was teaching it. He was just teaching computer training, and his training was offered during school hours. so what the parent decided during school hours, she decided she'll just take her son out of school so that he can accommodate, the training, because it was that important to him. So in that way, she created a customized learning solution for her son. Also, more family time. So when you homeschool, you get to spend a lot of time with your kids, and they grow up so quickly. And so that's some of the reasons people decide to homeschool. Added to it, like I said, out of necessity today, because of what's going on, parents want to homeschool for safety reasons. And so as we talk more about homeschooling, just keep in mind that the advice for homeschooling temporarily, again, it differs from the advice for homeschooling permanently. And I'll try to distinguish between the two as we talk more about it. Another thing you want to consider when you're homeschooling is to remember that there's no one solution for everybody. So I say try to avoid the assembly line issue. It's like when a product is being made and they're being sent along the assembly line, each stage of it, each product goes through the exact same process at just at different stages. Well, that's not the situation with children. There's a different learning experience that can be put together for your child because they're unique. And they have different strengths and different learning skills. And so you want to be aware of what those learning types are. Like some are visual learners, some are kinesthetic learners. They like to touch things and fool with their hands, and some learn a lot just by hearing. And so you want to be aware of the learning style of your child and not just do the same thing you did. Maybe if you attended traditional school, it's very tempting. It's very tempting to just bring out the books and do it exactly like how we did when we were in school, but we have to be a little bit more flexible than that. Now, a problem that some parents may encounter, especially right now if they're going to be homeschooling temporarily, is how do I homeschool and work at the same time? Because it's challenging. And when we think about homeschooling, sometimes we think the ideal situation would be to just homeschool, just focus on homeschooling, but that's not always ideal. And it may not be financially feasible to just choose working or to just choosing homeschooling. But although it's not ideal, it is definitely possible. And there are lots of people around the world who are working and homeschooling at the same time. It just requires you to be a little bit flexible when it comes to how you use your time and how you use the resources that you have. I know of a parent who, she's a university lecturer. She would homeschool her kids in the morning up until the afternoon, and then she would go to work. And then her husband would take over and teach the kids math in the afternoon. And so that works for their family. There are some parents that are off 2 or 3 days out of the week, and they homeschool for just those 2 or 3 days out of the week. And you may think, well, that's not a lot of time. But if you consider that if you homeschool 2 or 3 days out of the week, you can homeschool year round. There would be no need to stop for summer breaks. And so your kids do get the information that they need. Another thing to consider is that when you're homeschooling, you because it's one-on-one, you don't need as much time during the day with your child. So my son, for example, when he was 4 and 5, we would do lessons for about 1 hour of the day because that's all it took. And if I did lessons with him one-on-one between 9 and 3 straight, that would be really intense, that one-on-one interaction. So 1 hour was all that it took. So it is possible to work and homeschool. You just have to be really flexible. You don't have to choose one path. Another thing, parents may wonder, can I afford to homeschool? Can I afford to, in the event that they choose not to work? Maybe it's both parents in the home. Maybe the father will continue working, and maybe the mother decides she wants to commit to this completely, but she's wondering, is it really affordable? Some things we want to consider when you're homeschooling is that there are expenses that wouldn't even apply anymore when you're homeschooling. For example, you may only need one family vehicle if you're homeschooling. Maybe eating food from out, taking your lunch maybe at school, taking your lunch at school, the kids having their lunch at school, you have to give them a certain amount every day for their lunch. Maybe even as the parent, you decide to buy lunch out. You'll find that you probably do that more often if you're working outside of the home. But if you're at home, it's cheaper to just everybody just eat food right there at home. Also, the school supplies. When your kids go to traditional school, usually there's a mandatory set of school supplies that they need. But when you're homeschooling, you can be more selective. You can pick and choose what you want your kids to use. Maybe they don't need backpacks and things of that sort. And then there's also selected field trips. So when your kids are in traditional school, you want them to get involved. Or if you want them to get involved and not be left out, you want them to attend the field trips. And the cost for these things are not determined by the parent. But when you're homeschooling, you decide where your kids go for field trips, and it's all based on your budget, what you can afford. And then there's no fancy uniforms or fancy clothes or anything that's needed when you're homeschooling. So you would have to do the numbers and see how it adds up for your family, and then see what the totals are. And you may find that you actually do save money while homeschooling. Now, I've had questions from parents that they ask me, well, I want to homeschool my son, he's 6. Where do I start? And also, what grade level is he at? And the interesting thing about homeschooling kids is that they are at different grade levels for different subject areas. It can be that way because, especially if they like to read, because as they read, they take in a lot of information about one topic or the next. So for example, my son, he loves history. So he just reads history books on his own for pleasure. And so his level for history is probably 3 grades higher than his level for math, because he's not doing math for fun. And so, that's how it may end up being. And you may have a child who really loves geography or maps and whatnot. So they're just always in maps. So they may be at a higher level for one subject than the next. So if you're just starting homeschooling and you're wondering what level your child is at, you want to do an assessment on a subject by subject basis. So curriculums usually come with assessment tests to help you decide what level your child may be at. For example, the math curriculum that we use, which is called Saxon Math, has an assessment at the end of every, or a placement test is what it is, a placement test, so that you can assign it to your kids so you can see what level they're at. And it's okay that there are different levels. You just have to kind of keep track of that, and that would be fine.
So do you bother to make sure that your children are on par with the Bahamas curriculum, or it doesn't matter to you at all? Like BJC, GLAD, do you integrate the two at all?
Yes, that's another thing. That's another thing with homeschooling. If you plan to allow your kids to take BJCs and BGCSEs and get a Bahamas high school diploma, then you should make sure that what you're teaching them is in line with the curriculum. I personally am preparing my children for BJC. So even though I want them to sit other exams that's outside of the BGCSEs and the BJCs, I do want them to sit the BJC. So now there's the challenge of making sure they're studying for both. So it depends on the parent, because you don't have to let your kids sit BJCs and BGCSEs if that's not a part of your goal. For example, if your plan is to let your kids study in the UK, for example, maybe you want to use a British system, maybe you want to let them study for IGCSEs, or maybe you just want to prepare them. Maybe I've even met parents whose kids are enrolled in American high school homeschool programs. And so at the end of their educational career, they'll have an American high school diploma. And so those parents, they're probably not preparing their kids for BGCSEs. So it depends on your goals, your family's goals. Set your goal. And once you know what your goal is, then you can train your kids in that way. And it's tempting sometimes, to think, well, maybe I need to prepare them for this exam and also this exam, because the kids around me are also doing this exam. But if you know why you're doing this thing, and you can be confident in that, and you can be confident in the decisions that you're making to either prepare them for BJCs or not, or to let them take GLAD or not. Also, there are parents out there who do plan to send their kids back to traditional school. And so they may be wondering, well, how do I homeschool for just a year and then send my child back to school? And the thing you want to consider is, which school will your child be going back to? It's important that you speak with the school, let them know, I'm going to take off a year to homeschool, but I want to send them back to your school at the end of the year. So I need some information from you. And that information would be, for example, the book list. So the book list for that year that the child is, that you're taking them off. So if you're taking your child off in, say, at grade 6 level, get the book list for grade 6, find out what's going to be taught, and look at the curriculum, that the Bahamas curriculum, because most of the schools are following the Bahamas curriculum, and make sure that you're covering the topics that the 6th graders would normally be covering during that year, so that when they go back into school, they would be at the same level or higher than the students once they get back to school, just basically so they're not left behind. And that's something you want to consider. Now, if you're homeschooling temporarily, you still have flexibility though. You still have the flexibility to decide what time you're going to homeschool, what time those school hours are going to be, how you teach. You can still use the curriculum that the school is using, but keeping in mind the learning style of your child. And so a lot of the flexibility options are still there.
One of the scenarios that we came across was that both parents were essential workers. So they have to go in, but they really don't want their child in school. And so they were trying to have like a grandparent or a caretaker, play the role of homeschool teacher, but there wasn't enough clarity in terms of if that's allowed for someone to come in and teach my child and it's not me. There wasn't much guidance on that.
As far as I'm aware, according to the Ministry of Education, it is okay for a relative, like a grandparent, maybe an aunt, to homeschool your child. But if your child is being homeschooled and you're paying for it, you'll need to let the Ministry of Education know that, because they have their own definition of homeschooling that may be different from what we think or what other people think. They want to know what's going on. So they want to know whether you're paying for this education or whether you're not. And if you go to the website, NACOB's website, you go to NACOB, they have the information right there asking homeschoolers to register so they can keep track of what's going on and what people are doing. So it is okay, as far as I'm aware, to allow a relative to homeschool your child. Okay, let's see. Sometimes a question homeschool parents may have, or an issue they may encounter, is that they don't know how to teach a certain subject. I don't know math. Or, let's say you're homeschooling temporarily or permanently, and your child is in the 10th grade or the 11th grade, and they're doing a higher level math than you can even remember. Then you're thinking maybe, well, how do I homeschool if I don't know math or I don't know history or geography? And well, that's not a problem, because most parents, when the kids get at a certain age, they outsource that education anyhow, because it gets a little difficult, or you don't want to limit what your child knows based on what you know. And so you can outsource it. There are online homeschool programs. There are online courses like what's offered on the Student Shared, where we offer BJC and BGCSE courses. And there are individual online tutors that can, help your child with a certain topic. And so particularly with topics like math and sciences and foreign languages, parents would outsource those anyhow. And so it's not really a problem. And if you do, in fact, if you don't want to teach anything, let's say you're a parent, you're not lucky enough to have a relative like a grandparent or an aunt to homeschool your kid. You are maybe an essential worker, maybe you have to go in and work and there's no one else, then you can outsource the entire thing. because there are online homeschooling schools, online homeschooling programs, and maybe if you can't find one program that offers everything that you want, you can act as a facilitator, and you can just, or a curator too, and you can put it all, find the different pieces that your kids need and put it all together. Like you can find a writing program from one source, a math program from another source, and you just keep track of all of that. So as a facilitator, you would keep track to make sure that your child is logging into the classes, that they are taking the quizzes. You can get copies of the emails of their assignments and make sure that if it's not done properly, they redo it, or the quiz results. If they didn't get a favorable result, just tell them do it again. And all of this you can do without having to know how to teach a subject and without having to be there physically to teach a subject. You may, if it's a young child, want to hire somebody, or maybe have some relative who can be at home with the child as they're doing their online work. You can create a schedule for them as well. What I started doing with my kids, we started using Google Classroom just to create classrooms to keep track of the different BJC topics that they're preparing for, so we can put all the resources that I find online that can help with a certain topic. We just throw it in there. And so each day they'll log into their Google Classroom and see what the work is for that day. And so there's really a lot of ways that you can do this, even if you don't want to teach or you can't teach.
So your youngest now is how old?
My youngest is 2.
Oh, youngest is 2. Oh, so you have to start all over again.
All over again. Yep.
I
Yes.
thought you were, you were done. You had like, I thought the youngest was like 6 and you just funnel them through, but yep.
No, I'm starting all over again, which is so important, which is the reason why I have to put in systems. So the things that I put in place are things that I hope that can be carried on to the youngest too. So when they get to a certain stage, they can just go straight into, they can just take a hold of that system and use it. For example, what I'm putting together in Google Classroom, I only do it once. So now that when the younger ones come up, they log into the Google Classroom, they already see the assignments and it's done. So I'm trying to create some automation here and some systems in place. And those are the things that parents do, especially when they have a lot of kids. And, sometimes when they have a lot of kids, they also allow the older ones to teach maybe a portion of a lesson to the younger ones, because by doing that, it reinforces what the older ones already know. And, it saves a lot of time doing it that way. Yeah, so there are a lot of challenges that parents may experience while they're homeschooling, but what's not limited is the advice and the experience of other homeschooling parents out there. And you should feel free to look outside of the Bahamas too for some of that advice. For example, there's a Facebook group called, I was supposed to mention this, called the Working Homeschool Mom Group by Jen McKinnon. It's a large group of working homeschool mothers who are very supportive, and they've come up with all these different ways of, and creative ways of still homeschooling even though they have to work. And it's a group that I'm a part of, and the women, they're great in there. It's very supportive. And so I would recommend, if you are a working parent, that you join that group. Yeah, so there's been no better time to actually start homeschooling than now, because of all of the resources that are out there and available to help homeschool parents. Another thing parents may want to consider is, if I homeschool, will my child be able to get into college? And if you're wondering that, well, the answer is yes. And the reason I say that is because colleges love homeschoolers. What they love is the fact that homeschoolers tend to be mature, well settled. They tend to know, they know themselves, they know where they're headed, and they're least likely to be burnt out from too much work or overload. And they tend to be independent learners. Like I mentioned, when you have a lot of kids, you tend to put up some sort of system in place. Mm-hmm. And that system usually results in the children becoming independent learners, because you just can't teach everybody at the same time.
I remember when I went to university, it was very intense, because I think this is about 10 years now. It was a lot of what we did in school was more paper-based and book-based. But when I went to university, we were a hybrid of book-based. We still used like, physical textbooks, but we had online platforms where I submit my homework assignments. And it was so overwhelming for me to go from one form to the other form because I was like, where is everything? But I would assume a homeschool student is already accustomed to, number one, submitting work electronically, navigating different systems, and also that hybrid of paper and online. And so that starts me. I don't know what it's like today in schools, but I know it was a huge shock for me to adjust to university life because things were all over the place. And I was like, how do I do this thing?
I can definitely see how that would have happened. And you said it was about 10 years ago, right? Right. So 10 years ago, our school system, we have to think about where we were at that time. And we weren't very digital, but I guess it was so in other places. I think that, yes, homeschoolers, a homeschool student today who's graduating, going into college would probably be equipped for something like that. But also in traditional school now, out of necessity, it's starting here in the Bahamas where they're getting more digitized. And so they will also be equipped and it won't be as much of a shock, I think. Yeah. Another thing parents may want to consider is what about socialization? When I told, some of my friends that I was homeschooling, they were concerned that, well, what about your kids interacting with other kids and becoming sociable, And I said, well, they're not living in a bubble. And that's how it is when you're homeschooling. I like to call it a life schooling experience because socialization is not exactly what people think. It's not just, socialization is the ability for your children to interact with society and get along with people of all different ages, not just the children who are their age and who are, sitting in a classroom with them. And homeschoolers, they enjoy the company of other children their age, but they also enjoy the company of younger children and adults as well. Because in this homeschooling experience, they're encountering, they're out the house sometimes. They're running errands maybe with their parents and they're spending time with their families. And homeschoolers, they tend to have a lot more free time after academics are done. And so they tend to get more involved in a few other things in the community. And so you find that they're very well socialized. They know how to behave in society and they know how to have respect for younger children and respect for the elderly as well. And so, with the proper training, your children can be very well socialized with society, with other people. Yeah. And so was there any other question in particular maybe I haven't addressed that you might be interested in?
I think you covered pretty much everything. A lot of people, they are in the situation, well, I think the decision has been made at this point, whether they're going to take their child out for the year or not. But in terms of, trends in education and in terms of this pandemic, do you think saying I'm taking my child out for a year is realistic? You think this will be all finished, or are you preparing, or are you encouraging people to really think more long term, or maybe 2-year, 3-year with this homeschool situation?
Well, when a parent tell me that they want to homeschool for the year, I don't think only about the pandemic. I think about the experience that I think they're going to have. So if I can help them get set up to create a smooth homeschooling experience, or if they, without my help or whatever, but if they can set up a smooth homeschooling experience, then I feel like there's a chance they're going to see a lot of improvement in their child's grades, their behavior, their outlook. And whether or not the pandemic is still going on, I feel like there will be some parents who want to continue. There'll be those who want to send their kids back to school. That's fine. But I can't say for sure, of course, how long this situation is going to last with this pandemic. But like I said, when I do hear of parents wanting to homeschool temporarily, I do think, well, there's a chance you're going to love it. And be prepared to keep going if that's the case. Yeah. And I guess I would like to know that if they need the support, to keep going, then, you know, well, I can be there to help them with that, or they can find a resource somewhere. So, you know, that's something that would be, I think, very wonderful.
Before we close, you can talk a little bit about the Student Shed and the resources there in the community itself.
Okay, well, the Student Shed is an online learning platform that's been around for, I guess, since 2011. Yeah, that's what, 9 years. And we provide learning resources to help for parents and children who are preparing for GLAT, BJC, and BGCSE exams. And these resources are along the lines of activities, free resources like access to the curriculum, downloads and past papers and past paper answer keys. Also online classes for BJC and BGCSE as well, and study tips and guides and whatnot. And so that's what the Student Shed is. It's basically a support for parents who want to have a more direct role in their kids' education, not just homeschool parents. It's just parents in general. If you're looking to supplement what's being taught in school, just to give your kid a little extra, you know, you can come to the Student Shed and find information to help with that.
I used it a lot as a tutor, especially the access to past papers, not having to interact with the government. You just get it online. You know, that was very efficient. So thank you so much for your time with us this morning. I know the replay is going to help and bless some ladies. So I'm just going to pray us out. And then we can have our Mondays. So dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this opportunity to glean from the women who have gone before us. I thank you for Tansey and her family. May you continue to bless them and allow them to flourish in every single area of their lives. I thank you for this new day, this new week. I pray that it be a productive one, that you guide us and that your grace will cover us. I pray that this word will be planted upon good ground, that shall spring upon good fruit. I pray for parents who are navigating the school system right now and are making these very instrumental decisions for their children. I pray for wisdom and guidance and for your protection. Amen. Okay, so happy Monday. Thank you so much. This was awesome. I mean, I don't have kids yet, but I know I'm going to use this information one day because I have homeschool dreams too. So thank you. Blessings to you and have a great week. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.